Slavery in America began when the first African slaves were brought to North America colony of Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 to aid in the production of such lucrative crops such as tobacco. Slavery was practiced throughout the American colonies in the 17th and 18th centuries, and African American slaves helped build the economic foundations of the new nation. The invention of the cotton gin in 1793 solidified the center importance of slavery to the South's economy. By the mid-19th century, America's westward expansion, along with a growing abolition movement in the North, would provoke a great debate over slavery that would tear the nation apart in the bloody American Civil War. Through the Union victory freed the nation's 4 million slaves, the legacy of slavery continued to influence American history, from the exciting years of Reconstruction to the Civil Rights Movement that emerged in the 1960s, a century of emancipation. In the early 17th century, Europeans settled in North America turned to African slaves as a cheaper, more plentiful labor source that indentured servants. After 1619, when a Dutch ship brought 20 Africans ashore at the British colony of Jamestown, slavery spread throughout the American colonies. Though it is impossible to give accurate figures, some historians have estimated that 6 to 7 million slaves were imported to the New World. In the 17th and 18th centuries, black slaves worked mainly on the tobacco, rice, and indigo plantations of the southern coast. After the American Revolution, many colonists in the North, where slavery was relatively unimportant to the economy, began to link the oppression of black slaves to their own oppression by the British, and to call for slavery's abolition. Slavery itself was never widespread in the North, though many of the region's businessmen grew rich on the slave trade investments in southern plantations. All of the northern states abolished slavery, but the so-called particular institution remained absolutely vital to the South. Though the U.S. Congress outlawed the African slave trade, the domestic trade flourished out and the slave population in the U.S. nearly tripled over the next 50 years. It had reached nearly 4 million, and with more than half living in the cotton-producing states of the South. Slaves in the antebellum South constituted about 1/3 of the southern population. Most slaves lived on large farms or small plantations. Many masters owned less than 50 slaves. Slave owners sought to make their slaves completely dependent on them.
Oladauh Equiano was one of these slaves that had to go through all these sufferings, but he was more fortunate than most slaves because he was able to purchase his freedom. After all he went through, he ended up writing an autobiography called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Oladauh Equiano.
One day when all our people were going out to their works as usual and only I and my dear sister were left to mind the house, 2 men got over our walls and in a moment seized us both. And without giving us time to cry out or make resistance, they stopped our mouths and ran off with us into the nearest wood. Here they tied our hands and continued to carry us as far as they could. Next day proved a day of greater sorrow than I had yet experienced, for my sister and I were separated. A gentleman whose name was Michael Henry Pascal, while he was at my master's house, it happened that he saw me and liked me so much that he made a purchase of me. I was sent quarterly from the house of my then master, one Mr. Campbell, to the place where the ship lay. When I arrived, I was carried on board a fine large ship loaded with tobacco and just ready to sail from England.